Anne was worried about her husband, Mark. Things were better after he met with a priest, but they didn't last. She didn't know what to do. Mark didn't want to talk about it. He got angry whenever she tried. 2 days later, he continued to block her attempts to talk about what was happening, and he seemed to be becoming more discouraged every day. On Saturday, she remembered something. The last time there was tension between them was about moving. Mark wanted to talk about it because his commute was getting longer, the home was feeling crowded, but Anne wasn't ready to talk about it. She couldn't even handle the thought of something so big, and honestly, she just didn't want to move. One morning, after dropping the kids off at school, there was a breakthrough. She went to the chapel, and she wrote later that night in her diary, "The monstrance was on the altar just in front of me. I sat looking at it. In that moment, I felt Jesus' presence there before me and a deep sense of being loved. For a few minutes, that was all I felt. In that moment, too, something resistant in me gave way. I knew that I needed to let Mark talk about the move, and I knew that I was ready to do it. We spoke that evening, and the tension began to wane." So what we have here is someone paying attention to the movements of her heart. There's something spiritual going on there, and so she's able to discern God's will. So what I want to do today is very simple. I want to introduce you to this whole aspect of paying attention to what's going on, these spiritual movements of our hearts, so that you can know what God's plan is for you. Now, there's a lot to say about this topic. I'll give you some examples later on in this homily, and today in the online chat, if this really interests you, I'm going to go deeper into two parts of this homily. I've kind of prepared a few thoughts about it. So for those who want to learn more, we'll do this right after Mass. But for now, this homily, the simple theme is begin again by going to the heart. We keep on talking about beginning again. But today I want you to go to the heart. And very simple, just start paying attention to what's happening here. St. Paul writes in the second reading, "Brothers and sisters, when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption to sonship." Pay attention to three ideas here. The first idea, it says, when the fullness of time had come. What does that mean? It means that God had a predetermined date as to when Jesus would be born, when he would die, and when he would rise. So this wasn't something random. Jesus wasn't just born in any year in human history. There was a plan by God. So point number one, God has a plan. And he has a plan for you and me. Number two, what was the goal of the plan? The goal was that, quote, that we might receive adoption to sonship. So St. Paul's writing to the Galatians. The Galatians, before they'd become Christian, believed in these elemental spirits of the universe. So cosmic powers, they weren't real. They can't really help them. So it's a kind of slavery. But then they became Christian. They were baptized, and they received this freedom. Now, I always ask this question. It's a very simple theological question. How many children does God the Father have? Natural children. And it's one. Jesus is his only natural child. But he has many adopted children through baptism. And so for those of us who are baptized, we receive this freedom. God's our Father, and he has this plan for us. And his goal, he wants us to be his children. So I wonder if you've ever met parents who are just about to adopt a child. They're so excited, and they love that child, even before that child is legally their own. That's the kind of love with which God has formulated his plan for us. 3, God's plan required cooperation. It says born of a woman, refers to Mary, our spiritual mother. So God has this great plan, but he actually designs it so that we cooperate. And so what we want to do again, you want to pay attention to the heart and then cooperate with what God is doing there. Begin again by going to the heart. The gospel says, Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. What's she pondering? Well, let's say two things. The shepherds had just come. She's just given birth to Jesus. The shepherds have just arrived. They tell her this story about seeing angels. It's all come true. And she's also pondering, according to this saint called Venerable Bede, all the Old Testament prophecies. She's heard them since she was a child. Now they're all coming true. Father George Aschenbrenner, he's a renowned spiritual author and a formator of priests. He says there are 3 dimensions of the human person. Lots of ways to describe the human person. Here are 3. 1, our external behavior. 2, the skin of the soul. That's our emotions and feelings. And then he says 3, the core of the soul. That's the heart. Now I'm going to give you a lot of examples so that you get familiar with what's happening there. A man gives $5 to a homeless man because he sees Christ in that man. But there's another part in him that pulls away from this poor man. But the deeper part sees Christ there. A priest obeys his bishop, even though his assignment is challenging, and the people at St. Anthony's are very unruly. But he doesn't do it because he needs a pat on the back. He does it from his core. A teenager, he does dishes. He hates it. He only does it to avoid getting into trouble. But later there's a change in his heart. He wants to help his parents now. A young woman spends time in the chapel out of love, but there's another part in her that wants to be with her friends. But she follows her heart, goes to the chapel first, then goes later with her friends. True story. A mother says to her daughter every day before she leaves for school, "I love looking at you." And this stays with the daughter the rest of her life. A non-Catholic is prayed over during Alpha and experiences a warmth, something very deep. All of us function very well on our external behavior. We're quite aware of that. We're more aware of our feelings, but we're not very attentive to what's happening deeper in us. So whenever we have conversations, it rarely goes to matters of the heart. So again, what we're doing right now, we're building this awareness. And God is asking our whole parish family, be open to sharing what's on your heart. Here are 3 areas where we can go. First, friendship. So for me, this has been really quite beautiful. Now that I realize there are other people who are willing to go deeper, it really makes conversations much more satisfying. So there are few people now that I can literally, we can say to each other, what's on your heart? And it's a very intimate experience because you start sharing your experience of God, your legitimate needs, some pains, some longings. You start articulating what happens in prayer. As Christians, we're called to share deeper things because that's part of what it means to live in communion. Second, confession. Since I've been back from my sabbatical, I regularly now ask this question when I hear confessions: where is your heart focused? Now, from my point of view, this has been very powerful, and I'm starting to hear more and more positive feedback. Whenever we go to confession, we usually have lots of things on our mind, and maybe we have a lot of emotions, but if you start going to the heart, it focuses on one thing. So let's say I go to confession, and the priest, he's good enough. He says, "Father Justin, what's on your heart?" I might say something like, okay, go deep, and I say, I really want to get rid of that sin. I mentioned so many other things during the confession, lots of things I could talk about, but when I go to the heart, that's the main thing. So God would be guiding me there. Another possible answer could be, I go to confession, what's on your heart, Father Justin? I feel very loved. I feel very blessed. And then God would want me to stay in that experience of love and prayer and blessing after that confession. So from now on, when I hear confessions, obviously I can't ask other priests to do this. If you come to me for confession, I'm generally going to ask this question, but please be aware this is not counseling, this is not spiritual direction, and this is not intended to be an extended discussion. You have to be aware of people waiting behind you in the lineup. Now here's the good news. When you go to confession, this is probably a better way to do it if you want to have spiritual growth. You go to confession, you name your sins. You name the number of times you've done them. You don't have to describe all the circumstances surrounding each of those sins. So that's a bit more concise, but what that does do is it leaves much more time for you to focus on what God's put on your heart. And of course, you don't have to do this. You don't have to share because it's between you and God. But if you do choose to share, I, as your priest, can try help you point. I can try to help point you better in the direction where God is calling you. Again, this is the second idea I'll talk about in the online chat after Mass, exactly how that works. And third area where we can grow, it's in the vision of our parish. So I've been listening to what God's been putting on my heart lately for this past month, and I think it's time to re-envision our parish. So we have our current parish vision. It's existed for 3.5 years. It's helped us grow. It's been really quite beautiful. But I get the sense that we're plateauing. A lot of us are very comfortable with our prayer lives. We're very comfortable the way we're loving Jesus, loving like him, and I think we're very comfortable with the way we evangelize. And because healthy things are always growing, I've sensed it's time to listen again. Lord, where exactly are you calling us? I don't anticipate this is going to take a whole year to re-envision. I'm thinking maybe about 8 months. And right now, I'm spending a lot of time praying about this and talking to other Catholic leaders. Because today is the solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God, we're going to end with a story about motherhood and about a special call. Jennifer's 2 children were both under 2 years of age, and she was pregnant with her third. If you had asked her 5 years ago who she'd be, she would have said that she would be a successful career woman, not even interested whether or not she were married. But now, she was happily married. She loved her children, but she was exhausted. One afternoon, when the children were quiet, a thought came to her mind as she's pregnant with her third child. The thought was, I might not be done having babies. It was partly pragmatic because she and her husband were only children, so she wanted her children, since they won't have any cousins, to have more children, people their age. But mainly, the reason was spiritual. When Lucy was born, there was still chaos, but God provided for them, including, for example, enough money for a used minivan. Even though there was the chaos, she still felt the special call from God to maybe have a big family. One day after discovering that she was pregnant with her fourth, she stopped by her parish church, asking God for peace. She wrote in her book, I'd been trying to run from that call to have a big family for years, and now it was time to give up. It felt too right to keep fighting it. Just as she was leaving the church, she went outside. She saw this group of about 30 Mexican Catholics, all celebrating, and it was just at the end of a wedding rehearsal, and she had this sense that said to her, stay, watch. As she watched this group celebrating, and they were of all ages, she noticed their joy and their warmth and their laughter, and it brought back happy memories of childhood. And she started imagining what the future of this large family would be. And a phrase came to her mind, wholeness of vision, wholeness of vision. And so what she learned from that is, at the moment, she couldn't see beyond the current problems of her life with all the chaos of the children. She couldn't see, for example, when her children would be 25 years old, sitting around at the Thanksgiving dinner. She couldn't see when her children would be in their 50s, bringing her flowers when she was in her hospital bed. And so she said, this moment had given me the peace I'd been searching for. There were still questions, but I knew that the path of being unusually open to babies was the right one for us. So do you see how often God spoke to her at the level of the heart? God took care of her, and that's why her book is called One Beautiful Dream. We begin again by going to the heart.